and gentlemen, Ben Coley here, and it is April the 20th, 2015, and we want to talk about the environment today, especially man-made problems relating to the environment. Seems like we have people like Al Gore and the Democrats are always saying that the environment is being bastardized and we're being polluted. And I have my doubts. I mean, I watch the internet night and day. I listen to many people's points of view, not just the mainstream media. We all know there are a lot of cars on the road, but on the other hand, they talk about global warming now. It's been widely reported, and I have to take this as true, that the Pacific Ocean is 6 degrees higher temperature being recorded at this time than it would have been years ago at the same time. So the Pacific Ocean is warming. Well, I have to start to put two and two together here now, and I'm not trying to be a wise guy or anything, but let's talk about this for a minute. What happened to, let's talk about the Pacific Ocean, because we know it's a Pacific Ocean that's 6 degrees warmer. Let's take this global warming thing one piece at a time. We know that the Pacific Ocean is the largest body of water, the largest ocean in the world. The Pacific Ocean also has been affected dramatically by the Fukushima disaster. We know that there are some 6 reactors that we believe melted down. Either they all melted down or most of them melted down. And the coriums, which is the melted blob of the radionuclides, are reacting, and they're glowing, and probably if you could look at them and see them, they would be melted and they would be glowing brighter than the surface of the sun, so you wouldn't even be able to look at them. It would be like looking directly into a welder's arc or looking straight at the sun, only it would be many times stronger than that. So, and the amount of poisons and toxins or radionuclides coming off of these things, that, by the way, the lives of these things last forever. They don't break down like if sewage, for example, were to leak into the ocean. That's not a big deal, because in a day or so that's going to break down and it's going to be of no effect. And if anything, it's going to help the weeds at the bottom of the ocean grow, and that's going to provide food for the fish, and it's going to make the fish grow healthier and stronger. It's kind of like fertilizing the ocean. And if the ocean becomes fertilized by too much fertilizer, let's talk about runoff for a minute. You're going to be stimulating the organisms like the plankton, and those organisms take in CO2 and they export oxygen. So you actually have a beneficial effect. So by having fertilizer runoff into the water, while it might reduce the clarity of the water, so when you look at the water you're going to say, well, the water has a brown tinge to it, or it's not transparent anymore. You've got plankton in the water. You've got seaweed growing in the water. Well, this is not a bad thing, because that seaweed is producing oxygen that we all breathe. See, we all think that the oxygen somehow is magically here on Earth, and we only have so much of it to breathe, and every time you start the engine of your car, you're putting out carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, and the engine of your car is using oxygen, and therefore we have a sort of a guilt complex building up. And maybe we should have, to some certain extent, a complex of guilt that we're burning fossil fuels, and that does use oxygen, because you need oxygen as part of the process to run an engine or to have a flame burning. For example, if you're using gas, natural gas, to cook your food or to heat your hot water, that flame that's burning, not only does it use the natural gas, for which you have to pay a bill for the natural gas. No one gives you your natural gas for free, but it's combining with the oxygen in the air, and that's what makes the flame. We're going back now to first and second grade science here, but let's start at the beginning so we can make things understandable for all. But scientists know now that most of the oxygen on the Earth comes from the ocean, and it comes from the seaweed in the ocean. It comes from the micro life in the ocean, these one-cell organisms, the photoplankton, the plankton, the small, tiny, little microscopic organisms that if you had a microscope, and I've got one right here, and I've actually used it and looked at the water, and you can see if you were just to take a cup of water and take a droplet out of that water and put it on a slide and look at it under the microscope, even a low-power microscope, say a 40-power magnification, you would see these organisms swimming around. Well, those organisms are actually making oxygen. And so the ocean has, you can't count how many of these organisms are in the ocean. They're just, when you go swimming, you're swimming in the water, but you're also swimming with these organisms all around you. Now, they don't hurt you or anything, and you can't see them. Unless you're allergic or something to them, they don't harm you in any way. Even if you swallow them, they don't do anything. The stomach acids just digest it, and it digests as ordinary food in your stomach. So they're not dangerous to you, but they produce the oxygen of the earth. And every time a wave washes ashore and hits a boulder on the beach and it sprays up into the sky, that oxygen is released, and we have breathable oxygen being produced by the ocean. Now, on the other hand, if you go into the desert, the sand just sits there and it doesn't make any oxygen. The sand and the dirt, I mean, it's just sitting there. Well, I mean, you do have biologics in dirt, but if you just take purified sand, it's just sitting in the sun is irradiated to the point where it's just, there's no life in it. It's just sand. It's silica particles. You look at that under a microscope and you're going to see the little grains of sand, individual as they may be, but there isn't any life compared to the life that's in the ocean. Now, going back to the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean, the fact is, it's warmer. So let's ask ourselves, well, why aren't they saying that the Atlantic Ocean is warmer? I'm not saying it isn't warmer, and it could be a little bit warmer, but these effects could be from several things. The Pacific Ocean could be warmer because the sun is shining. You know, there is no guarantee that when we as human beings were placed on this earth, that the sun was going to shine with the same amount of intensity every single day of the year, every single year, and there weren't going to be solar storms that would maybe increase or decrease the output of the sun. So the sun may put out 1% greater energy this year than it did last year. And if it outputs 1% greater energy, that could lead to an increase in the global temperature, because all of the Earth's energy, every bit of it, comes from the sun. Everything on Earth that has been made, or energy to it, has been made because of the sun. It's tracked back either from sunlight from years ago, or it's from recent sunlight. And the oceans are directly heated by the sun. If the sun were to go out today, just flame out, in a matter of a couple of weeks, the oceans would get colder and colder and colder, and probably within a month or so, they'd freeze over, and the whole Earth would freeze. And so the point I'm trying to make is, something is making the Pacific Ocean, as compared to the Indian Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean, warmer. Otherwise, on the news, you'd be hearing, oh, the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean are heating up, and perhaps they are to a smaller extent, but the Pacific Ocean, that 6-degree increase, that is a remarkable number. A 6-degree increase in a body of water the size of the Pacific Ocean. You have to ask yourself, you know, something is going on here. So what happened to the Pacific Ocean? Now, I have to say, look, the major thing that happened to the Pacific Ocean is Fukushima. You have literally dropped into the Pacific Ocean the full output of 6 gigantic nuclear reactors. And all of the power that ordinarily would be used over a period of 30 or 40 years, and including all of the old materials that are still on site, that are still hot, even though those materials, those rods were used as fuel for the reactor many years ago, they're still hot and they have to be kept in a swimming pool. And the swimming pool has water circulating around it, but all that junk has been dumped or is being cooled by the Pacific Ocean one way or the other. But the bad thing right now is not only is the Pacific Ocean cooling this this gaggle of nuclear reactors, it's the 6 of them, but the fuel, which is so toxic that it is absolutely deadly to all organic life on Earth. So it would kill a human, it would kill an animal, it would kill a bird, a dog, and all the way down to a one-cell photoplankton in the ocean. And in fact, it would kill them first because they don't live very long, and when they become contaminated by these radionuclides, because they don't live long, they give birth and quicker so that they can multiply and they can stay in the same numbers as they were the year before. What happens is they can't give birth because their genetics has been damaged. So what happens is that whole line of life then dies off. And when that line of life dies off, then you have to say, well, okay, what relies on that line of life? So let's talk about baleen whales, whales that are filter feeding whales. They're usually the bigger whales, and they don't have teeth, but they have a jaw line that has filters in it, and they open their mouth and they basically swallow huge amounts of water. They don't swallow it, but they allow it to go into their mouth, and it filters out the sides, and the plankton is caught in the filters, and then they swallow the filters, and that's the form of protein that allows them to grow so big and to live and so forth and so on. And so if you take the plankton out, which is going to die very quickly from being hit by these radionuclides, and even a low dose is going to be enough to damage their reproductive capacity. So let's just say they're not killed directly by the toxins, but they don't reproduce. Well, they don't live very long, so right away their ecosystem, that part of the ecosystem, is going to collapse, and then those whales aren't going to have any food. But the other thing is, when these radionuclides get into the ocean, they're very, very hot, because you have to remember that nuclear power plant has to be kept cool. And when you keep that power plant cool, you're putting cool water on it, whether it be fresh water or whether they were dumping seawater on it because they had to keep it from exploding. And I guess at some point they said they just didn't have enough water, so orders were given to just dump Pacific seawater on it. I mean, they had to do whatever they had to do at that time. Now, as you recall, at that time, they were saying the reason that they had to keep these things cool is because the tsunami that came in, and there hadn't been a meltdown yet. But what happened was the diesel generators that make the electricity to run the pumps that circulate the water that would have kept this whole mechanism from melting down, that those diesel generators were in the basement of the buildings. And when the flood came in, obviously the basement's flooded, and so it was just nobody really thought about it. I guess they never figured that the basement would get hit by a tsunami, and if it did, they forgot to think that, well, the water would go into the basement. And so even though they thought enough ahead that they thought, well, if anything happens to the power supply to the nuclear power plant, that they would always have these generators. And in the United States, we have 100 nuclear power generators which are built the same as the one at Fukushima. It's the same design, and they all have generators with enough fuel to run. They're supposed to have enough fuel to run for a week, but the ones that are upgraded and get real braggadocio about how cautious they are, they say we have enough diesel fuel to run for a month, so if there was a collapse of the grid or something, because there could be a collapse of the grid, if there were a solar storm, there could be a collapse of the grid whereby a lot of transformers could burn out that take years to replace, so they may lose power. But if you lose power and you lose the ability to keep a properly running nuclear power plant cool, then the properly operating nuclear power plant will melt down, overheat, and then release all of its toxins, and everybody within 1,000 miles is going to be poisoned. Either evacuate or you're going to die. So that's pretty much, in a way, what happened over here at Fukushima, only in their case it was a natural disaster, which I would like to investigate, because we need to know if this truly was a natural disaster. You know, we're finding out now there are some scientists that are saying, and this is not making the frontline news, but if you research deep, you find out that the military-industrial complex in the years past has been bragging about the fact that they have what they call tsunami weapons, where they can generate a tsunami that will make a wave, which is a tsunami, that will hit the coastline and wipe out any enemy that's along the coastline. So then you might want to wonder, gee, you know, is it possible that somebody was using one of these tsunami weapons and made the tsunami that hit the Fukushima reactor? Because frankly, the epicenter of the disaster that hit Fukushima was right offshore of Fukushima. I mean, that's where it was, folks. That's a fact. And also, the American Navy was there awful fast, and they have nuclear warheads. And America is one of the countries that say they have tsunami weapons. It could have been China too. Let's just say if that were the case. But let's just put all that aside for a minute, and let's just say, look, what happened happened. We had an earthquake, we had a tsunami, let's call it a natural event. I think we need to investigate. It isn't going to really cost that much to investigate, but I think it should be investigated. In any case, what happened was the water came in and it flooded the diesel generators, so now they had no electricity because the natural electricity from Japan was knocked out by virtue of the fact that the telephone poles were down and all the wiring was down. Any way of getting electricity from an off-site location was terminated. So there was no power coming from far away that could run the pumps to keep the generator running. So there was no way of moving the 1,000,000 gallons a minute or so of water they needed for each reactor just to keep it cool. So now the reactors are in danger of overheating because you don't have that circulating water. And when they went to use the backup generators, right away they realized, oh my God, you know, the generators are in the basement, and what was the first thing to flood when the wave hit? Well, you know, what's the first thing to flood at your house when it rains too hard? Well, sometimes some people get water in their basement. Well, that's what happened. They got water in the basement, came all the way up, flooded the generators, so now the generators weren't going to run. Then the next thing you heard was they said, if we had 12-volt batteries, and I clearly remember this. I think those articles aren't around anymore. It's funny, they took them down ever since I started complaining about this, but they said that if they had 12-volt batteries, they could have run the 12-volt DC pumps, and they could have used those 12-volt DC pumps to circulate enough water to keep the reactors from melting down. Now, if they were able to keep these reactors from melting down, whether salt water hit them or not is sort of immaterial. I mean, it might have been bad for the electronics and so forth and so on, but the first thing you have to do is to keep those things from melting down, because once they melt down, they're going to overheat, breach containment, because there's no containment in the world that can contain an out-of-control chunk of uranium that's basically glowing as hotter than the sun. So basically you have an atomic bomb. It's not exploding, but it's fissioning, and it's glowing white hot, hotter than the sun, and there's no metal that can hold it, and it can burn through the concrete or whatever kind of containment vessel that they have, it'll just crack the floor and fall through the floor, and then it lands in the earth, and then it'll just burn its way down through the earth until at some point, I guess, it hits the water table, which is what happened. But the Japanese who were on site were saying, we were pleading with the Japanese military to give us 12-volt batteries. Well, if they had 12-volt batteries, they're saying they could have run the backup electrical pumps, which is what they were using the diesel generators for. Had the diesel generators operated, the diesel generators would have been apparently powering these 12-volt pumps, and that would have turned over enough water that they could have kept this whole thing from melting down, and they could have kept this whole problem from happening. But the military, the Japanese military, delivered the Japanese people at the plant, the TEPCO people, they delivered them 2-volt batteries. So the engineers were saying, wait a minute, we asked you for 12-volt batteries, but you delivered 2-volt batteries. And they didn't know what to do. Now, here you have people who are running a nuclear power plant. They're the actual engineers. They're the controllers of the most powerful nuclear power plant on the face of the planet. And they don't know that they can take 6 of these 2-volt batteries with any ordinary set of jumper cables from an automobile and jump the positive to the negative, positive to negative, positive to negative, and they can take 6 2-volt batteries, and then that'll make 12 volts, and then they can take the positive and negative off the 2 ends with another set of jumper cables and run the pump and keep the whole thing from melting down and the whole earth from being contaminated, especially the Pacific Ocean. So, number one, these people either were so stupid that they didn't know. I find it awful hard to believe that they didn't know that they could have taken those 2-volt batteries. I mean, I know just from the tutelage and the mentoring I had from my father and learning about solar energy and wind power and 12-volt boat projects and so forth. I know how to take a 2-volt battery and put a few of them together and make 12 volts or 18 volts or however many volts I need by putting them in a series circuit. So I find it hard to believe that the people running the control station, now I understand they were under pressure, they were probably being irradiated, and the alarm bells were going off, and the yellow lights were flashing, and the red lights were flashing, and they probably couldn't think straight, but still, there had to be someone there that knew that they could take these 2-volt batteries and get 12 volts out of a 2-volt battery. Not only that, but they would have had, because they would have had 6 2-volt batteries, they would have had, once they put 6 2-volt batteries together, it would have given them one hell of a big, strong 12-volt battery. And then they could have kept that 12-volt battery, once they put those 2-volt batteries together, they could have hooked that to any Honda automobile that survived the wake in the parking lot. They could have pulled it up and idled the engine, and the alternator could have acted as a generator and kept those batteries charged up enough, and that would have turned the motor. But I think that the electrical motors that would have been expected to run on these 12-volt batteries, I think that they went underwater too, and they wouldn't have run, because once 12-volt, once these electric motors get hit by salt water, they're not going to run. And so I don't think that would have run. But I mean, the point is, for them to say that they didn't have the right voltage batteries is crazy. And who knows? Maybe the motors would have run. I don't know. Maybe the motors were upstairs and didn't get hit by the tsunami while the generators being heavy and everything and vibrating a lot when they run. That they had the generators downstairs, but that the motors to turn were upstairs. Moreover, they had fire trucks that came from off-site. They could have used the fire trucks to, they could have plugged the fire trucks in series so that the water, whatever water they were going to use to cool the plants, could have gone into the fire truck, been pumped up by the fire truck, and then put back into the plant. So I believe that a lot of that is a lie, or you're being misled, or that the tsunami itself cracked the vessel and there was so much damage there that I think a lot of what they were saying is wouldn't have worked anyway because of the sheer amount of damage. But like I said, I think that given the fact that the amount of global damage that was done, there is no reason why we shouldn't spend some time and send a deep diving submersible to the site of the tsunami, where the epicenter of the earthquake, and look around at the bottom of the ocean there and see if there are any crater holes or evidence that an atomic bomb might have been used to detonate or to shift the earth somehow, or in some Jane Bond-esque way that maybe a wave was generated and maybe it wasn't intended to do that much damage, but maybe it was intended to do some damage. But then you have to ask yourself, key bono, I mean, who would gain by this? Who would want, if you were a bad guy and you could have anything you wanted, why would you want to damage those nuclear reactors? Well, let's just say you knew that if the nuclear reactors melted down, that it would release nuclear radiation. And if you think about it, that nuclear radiation is going to be carried by the current, the ordinary current, I forget what they call it, the Fukushima current or something, that goes straight from Japan straight to the United States. So that contaminated water is going to come straight to the United States. So if you don't like the United States, and I can't think of anybody out there who doesn't like the United States, who might be a superpower, who may want to knock the United States down a couple of pegs. So I don't know anybody who would want to harm the United States. I mean, there might be some country out there that doesn't like us enough that if they had a way of doing something bad to us, even from afar, maybe they would do it. But the bottom line is, if this was a man-made, a man-generated tsunami, we need to know that A, that this was done by somebody, B, who did it, and C, how do we stop it from ever happening again? And we need to make sure that all the plants in the United States, that even if this happened, whether it's man-made or whether it's not man-made, that our plants are protected from a tsunami or an earthquake. Should we have a serious earthquake in the United States, and it could happen. I mean, Yellowstone could blow, and if we lost electricity in the United States, we would have the same problem. We have to make sure that our power plants don't overheat and then melt down, because they're going to overheat and then they're going to explode, and you're going to have radioactive particles going all over the place, whichever way the wind's blowing. If you're downwind of that, you're going to be affected immediately. You're either going to get sick right away or you're going to die. And the best thing that can happen to you is that you're just going to lose 10 years off your life. I mean, that's the best thing that could happen to you. But the worst thing that can happen to you is that you're going to die within a couple hours. Terrible, terrible outcome, obviously. And moreover, if you know anything about the insurance business, you know that it says right in your insurance policy that nuclear disasters and nuclear fallout and nuclear problems are not covered on your homeowner's policy. So if you have to leave your property because it gets condemned by virtue of the fact that it's irradiated, whether it's your fault or the other fault or an act of war or just a natural disaster, it doesn't matter. If it's radioactive, if it's a radioactive based problem that's affecting your use of your property and you're asked to leave, that's it. You just lost everything. And if your house has been in your family for 300 years and 6 generations or whatever, it's all lost, and there is no insurance. I'm telling you this as an insurance expert. You could go read your policy. You don't have to, just take my word for it. It's not covered, folks. Not covered at all. And if for some reason an order should go out because the Pacific Ocean becomes more and more and more polluted, which it is. Every day that goes by, it's becoming more and more polluted because these radionuclides are being dumped into the ocean at the rate of 300 tons a day. Radioactive water that has radioactive nuclides that are going to last longer than our lives. And so therefore, as that crap comes across the ocean and builds up along our California coast, and is carried aloft in the winds aloft and blown inland into the United States, At some point, the United States government may say, well, the coast of California to a distance of 10 miles from the ocean to 10 miles inland may be declared a no-go zone. If that happens, your insurance is not going to pay. You're going to just lose your property. Now, I don't know who would get the property. If it becomes a radioactive no-go zone, I would imagine the only person that would be able to go there would be somebody in one of those suits like a moonwalker suit, but even those guys wouldn't be fully protected, and they would only be able to stay a short period of time because they'd have to breathe a respirator and so forth and so on. But that's what's happening, and if we don't plug this thing, and I have an idea to slow it down by building walls around it out in the ocean and allowing the pollution to leak out into the surrounding area, but to stop it there. So maybe you have a 1-mile pond around this thing where it's call it an ocean dump, if you will, but at least it will keep most of the radionuclides out of the balance of the Pacific Ocean. And Pacific Ocean being so big, I mean, if you lose lose a couple of square miles of it to pollution that is unspeakable and pollution that's dirty and bad enough that it would kill you in a matter of 30 minutes or less, that's okay. Because it's not okay, but it's better than the alternative where you're just letting this stuff come and come and come. And you have to remember that the Pacific Ocean is in fact connected to every other ocean by virtue of the fact that, well, you could take a kayak or a sailboat or any kind of a vessel and sail it from the Pacific Ocean from Japan. You could go anywhere that has water and an ocean, anywhere on the earth for the most part, unless you have an inland sea or something, or I'm not talking about lakes, but anywhere in the ocean. And all of the Earth's climate, if you have studied weather, and I took weather training to become a pilot, I took weather training to get my Coast Guard credentials, and Houston Marine Academy also had to take weather again, and I took weather in school, which everybody had to take. So I had a lot of weather training, and it wasn't advanced weather training, but it was enough to get the gist of things. And you have the jet stream, which is the big item that everyone needs to know about, which is the air moving around the Earth. And in the area that we're talking about, from Japan to the United States, the prevailing jet stream blows from Japan toward the United States. So in other words, it goes from west to east. So any radionuclides that make it high up into the sky are going to get caught up into this jet stream, and they're going to blow straight to the United States. And during World War II, if you can go back and read books and articles about this, the Japanese were so confident that this jet stream was going to blow straight to the United States that they launched bombs on helium balloons, or maybe they used hydrogen, I don't know, but they made balloons, military balloons, that would go up in the air, and they would get caught up in the jet stream, and they would blow to the United States. And they landed in Kansas and California and Oklahoma. They landed all over the place in the United States. I mean, that's how accurate. I mean, imagine this balloon blowing all the way across the Pacific Ocean at tremendous distance and then landing in the United States. Well, that's what's happening to these radionuclides. They're blowing into the United States. And that's probably where the radioactive iodine that came from, because the doctors told me the only thing that could have affected my thyroid, especially given the fact that the rest of me is healthy, is the radioactive iodine. And it's only one person in 100,000 that this affects, and it had to come from radioactive iodine. And radioactive iodine only comes from a nuclear fission reaction, and it has to be a new nuclear fission reaction, because it's not the kind of radiation that lasts a long time. It only lasts about 6 to 9 days, and then the half-life is gone, and then just, you know, you have the rest of it. So if you have an enormous amount of it, even if the half-life goes by, there's still enough of it left to affect your thyroid. But generally speaking, whatever it was that hit me, if it came from Fukushima, blew here pretty quick. So it would have got here in, say, a week. or less, or maybe a little bit more, but in greater quantities. So even after the half-life, there would have been plenty left to damage my thyroid. Now, admittedly, I did go swimming in the Indian Ocean in the 2 weeks leading up to my illness, and when I came out of the water, I did feel sick right away. I had a sore throat, and I had a weird cough that wouldn't go away, and I remember my throat was hurting, and I wasn't breathing out of scuba tanks because there was an emergency that required a diver, and because the water wasn't deep, I didn't wear any tanks, and it was an emergency, so I had to go into the water immediately. I didn't have a lot of time to think about putting a set of tanks on, which were available to me. I had all the gear available to me, but I knew that what I had to do as far as getting over the emergency part of the reason I was called to help, all I needed was a mask and fins, and I wore a full suit, a very skinny suit, but it was a full suit. So I put my suit on. I needed a weight belt because when you wear a suit you float, so you need a weight belt. So all I did was grab my weight belt, my full suit, and I had a hoodie as part of my full suit. So I pulled my hoodie up, and then I wore a mask, a snorkel, which was bad because every time I came up I had to catch my breath, so I was breathing in air that was very close to the surface of the water, and the waves were 3 to 4 feet high, so it was rough, and water was getting into the snorkel, and I had a purge valve, and I'm a trained rescue diver, and so all that is really the size of the waves. None of that bothers or scares me. I operate anyway, and I just put fins on and booties, and I just went in the water, and I didn't wear the tank. If I had taken the extra 10 minutes to put a tank and a regulator on, I believe that I would have saved my thyroid. But I had no idea that I was dealing with water and air that had radioactive iodine in. Now, radioactive iodine is very dissolvable in water, so it was probably in the water, and a lot of manatees died right around then. So those manatees were probably killed by the same thing that killed me, and they said they had heart attacks. And that's what happened to me. I thought I was having a heart attack, but when I got to the hospital and they did blood tests right away, they said, no, it's your thyroid. It's not, you're not having a heart attack. Your heart is very strong. As a matter of fact, you have an athletic heart. Your heart is extremely strong. And they gave me tests on a treadmill and everything, and they called me an athlete. They said, for your age, they said you have the heart of a 20-year-old, better than a 20-year-old. Because you don't lose your breath, and your arteries are all wide open and clean, and you must have exercise. And I do, and I don't smoke, and so I take good care of my body. But I had to do what I had to do. There was a marine emergency. Someone had to go down there and solve that underwater problem, and it was shallow water, so I did what I had to do. But getting back to the Pacific Ocean is heating up because you've got these coriums, which are the burning hot melted uranium in the ground now, and they're predicting that they're anywhere from 20 to 90 meters down into the ground. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the deeper these coriums go, the better off you are. I mean, you want these coriums to be all the way down deep. I mean, that's where the uranium came from in the first place. It came from the ground. If they can magically sink those coriums down 2 or 3 miles, and then they cool off so they stop generating steam, which comes up through the cracks in the ground, and it will work its way to the surface and then steam into the atmosphere. If they could stop it from steaming, and the way to do that would be to break the corium up into little pieces so you wouldn't have criticality. That would be the best thing. So it would be deep in the ground, and even though it would be exposed to the dirt, the amount of radionuclides and poisons being emitted into the ocean would be less. But you're actually heating the ocean up with these things. They're putting out so much heat, in addition to the poison that they emit, that you're heating up the ocean. And the poisons that they're putting out are killing off the microlife and the small fishes who have shorter lifespans because they're not able to reproduce. Remember, when it's time to reproduce is when the effects of the radiation are going to show up, and so they're not having children and babies, and so they're not reproducing. So then as the adults die off, the population crashes, and then the big fish have no little fish to eat. And there you have it. So you find these walruses and seal pups and birds and they're dying on the beach. And not only that, but clumps of hair are falling out, which is indicative of radiation poisoning. And they have sores, which is indicative of radiation poisoning. And they're trying to figure out what biologic killed them. They're trying to, the marine biologists, who, by the way, know better, they're looking for, what was it that killed this thing? Well, look, we all know it was starvation due to the radionuclides killing off the smaller fish, and so these fish starved to death. But seals that should weigh 250 pounds, they only weigh 90 pounds or 80 pounds. It's because they're starving to death because the smaller life is dead. They have no food to feed on. There are no sardines. There are no smaller fish, and the plankton is not there. So your whales are going to die. Your filter feeder whales, the big ones, are going to die off as well. But the ocean itself is heating up because there is so much heat coming off directly off of these coriums that it's heating the earth. I mean, it's almost like having your water heater in your ocean. It's like saying, I'm going to take all the water heaters of all mankind and put the water heater elements in the ocean and then cranking the thermostat up to full, and those elements are heating up directly, heating up the Pacific Ocean. So you've got two things happening here. One, the poison's killing off the sea life, and two, you're directly heating the ocean with these radionuclides. So, and the heating of the Pacific Ocean is going to change the weather patterns because now the air blowing in is going to be warmer. You see that there's no rainfall in California, but I attribute that to also the possibility that we're being bombarded from the sky with aircraft that are spraying contrails, and we have enough evidence now. It's prima facie evidence, so we need to investigate further. But I am the person who says, look, if you have thousands of people who believe that something bad is happening, I think that the EPA should be tasked with looking into this, and the FBI should be tasked with looking into this. You're talking about the Earth, folks, but the fact that the EPA turned the Geiger counters off after about a month, once Fukushima was steaming for about a month and the numbers started to go higher and higher and higher, they turned the Geiger counters off, and then they said they were recalibrating them, and then all of a sudden, then instead of them coming back recalibrated, they just never turned them back on again. We have a RadNet now that you can look at online. It's made up of individual people like you and me plugging a Geiger counter into your computer and taking the background radiation and then transponding that into the RadNet network, which is all civilian operated, paid for by civilians. And this all should be done by the EPA. And then for the EPA to turn around and say, and Al Gore saying the world is heating up and blaming the people like you and me, and because we're driving our cars and going to the bathroom, and the water quality and so forth, without mentioning the radiation word. I mean, we're not even hearing about this from the media. I mean, who is shutting up the media with respect to this? Now, I understand there's not a lot we can do about other than my plan, but why isn't my plan being invoked, where we start to wall this thing off? Let the Japanese do what they want to do to try to fix this thing. But in the meantime, we need to put a wall around this thing so they can try to shut their plant off, but at the same time, we need to wall the whole area off so that it doesn't affect the rest of the Earth. And if it can heat the Pacific Ocean up 6 degrees, folks, I have to tell you, you need an awful lot of heat generating effort to heat the Earth, the Pacific Ocean up 6 degrees. And that is what's happening, and that's how bad things are. Heating the Pacific Ocean up 6 degrees is proof of extreme release of energy, man-made energy. And remember, these radionuclides never existed in nature. They're all man-made. And we're measuring it now at the coastline of California, cesium-137. It does not exist in normal nature, so you can't say, oh, it's a byproduct of radon or something like that. No, folks, we're talking about radionuclides that are man-made. These are man-made toxins that are being released into the ocean, and they're not even talking about it on the mainstream news. Now, maybe it's because they don't want to panic everybody, but people can take steps right now to make sure that they don't go in the rain, so they don't have radioactive iodine hitting them, because when it rains, the radioisotopes fall out of the sky and they come down with the rain. And so if you're the kind of person who likes to run and play in the rain, I strongly advise not to do that. And sadly, if you're a Coast Guard captain like I am, and it rains, you're kind of stuck outside. Sometimes you just sort of have to deal with it. You're operating the ship or the boat, and you have to steer, or you have to tie up boat lines, or you have to do whatever you have to do when you're exposed to the outside. And when it's raining, I mean, you're out there, and not only are the raindrops hitting you, which are highly radioactive, but you're breathing in the mist, because there's mist in the air, and that mist has got atoms of radioactive iodine in it, and so you're breathing that right in, and it's going right into your lungs, sticking in your lungs. And it will shorten your life. If it doesn't make you sick immediately because you didn't take in a deadly dose, over time it bioaccumulates. Now, the short-lived radioactive 131 is going to die off over a period of 6 to 9 days. Okay, that's going to die off over a period of time, but you have to remember that wherever you have the radioactive 131, you're going to also have with it the other products that are horrific, like the uranium. They're going to travel together because they all came off the same corium. They all came off the same chunk of fuel. And just because the iodine 131 is in the air and that's what went into your thyroid, you also, it's presumed that you also breathed in these other items too. And that means you've got strontium in your bones, which is a bone seeker because it mimics calcium, and calcium is what goes into your bones. So absent your bone having enough calcium, when it uptakes what it thinks is calcium, it's going to uptake strontium, and that's going to last for a long time. The half-life for that is it's too high to even think about. I mean, it's millions of years, so it's going to be with you forever, folks. And if you're not feeling well, or you're getting cataracts, you wonder why why am I 50, 60 years old and I have cataracts? It's because the radiation, these radioactive isotopes are emitting protons and neutrons and particles that hit the eyeball and actually damage the eye and the lens system of the eye. If you adjust your camera to the right settings at nighttime and you leave your iris open, you can tune your camera in such a way that you can actually see these things by taking a time-lapse exposure. I'm not trying to scare you, but I've done this, and you can see that the water is radioactive, even with a regular old camera, as long as you can put the settings on manual. So anyway, I'm running for office, folks. I believe the government should take the lead in exposing all of this stuff. I think that the rad detection, all the radiation detectors should be turned on so that we know the extent of the damage and that we know how much radiation you're being exposed to. I just don't think it's fair that the government that we pay to do the work is just saying, sorry, our machine's not working right or whatever, or the information is available, but instead of it being in counts per minute, they put it in sieverts or microsieverts or rads, which is radiation accumulated dose. And so there are so many ways of expressing what the radiation is doing to your body or how much is being absorbed that it's hard for the average person to understand. But I think maybe we ought to at least have the counts per minute, and then once we know we have high counts per minute, which the average person can understand by looking at it as a number, kind of like, well, how hard is the wind blowing? Okay, it's blowing 20 miles an hour. Well, anybody can understand that. Then we can start to analyze if we have high counts per minute. We can ask the government, okay, if the counts per minute are high, let's take a gamma spectrometer. A gamma spectrometer is a tool that can take the high counts per minute and analyze it and see what what radioactive elements are making the high counts per minute. Is it uranium? Is it cesium? Is it iodine? So we know what we're dealing with, and we know where it came from. But most of all, folks, we have to realize that these accidents could happen right here in the United States. I mean, right near me, I have a nuclear power plant that if you look up the safety record of it, it has a lot of things wrong with it. It's getting old. It could crack at any time. It already has 1,900 wear spots in the cooling rods that could wear. Some of them are worn 40% through, and if they blow a leak, then you're going to have radioactivity leaking out, and it would go into a cooling building, but then the cooling building at some point would have to be ventilated, so it's going to be released at some point. Look, folks, and these things are so expensive. There's no reason why right now in the United States, and given the fact that we could use lots of jobs, and you don't need to be a rocket scientist to do this, there's no reason that we shouldn't be putting solar panels on the roof of every single home, because that sun is hitting the roof of your house whether you like it or not. There's no reason that you shouldn't take full advantage of it. And some people are saying, the naysayers, oh, well, the sun only shines in the day. Okay, well then the other smart people in the United States and around the world should be working on battery technology. So during the day when the sun's shining, we can take that energy and store it in a battery so that all night long it can be released. And we should also be working on other ways of storing the energy that may be battery-like, but not a battery. I can think of 3 or 4 ideas that no one has thought of yet that are ways of storing electricity during the day while the sun's shining that can be released later without losing any of its energy. And so, you could store this power for an indefinite period of time. And they are coming up, by the way, with new battery technology. But even that said, even if you use the solar power during the day and wind power at night, whatever wind power you get, and I know it's not dependable, sometimes the wind's blowing, sometimes it's not, there's no reason why that each and every home shouldn't have small wind towers on it. Like I said, we've been working on a project for years and years that involves small wind turbines, not big ones, but small ones. And we have proven that you can run a small home with solar power and wind power and make it work. And I'm not saying you're going to have more power than you would have if you were plugged into the grid, but I'm just saying a slightly scaled up version of what we already proved in our experiment, which is going to be released soon with our press release. You're going to find that you can use natural power. Now, do the oligarchs who own the nuclear power plants want this? No. But remember, our light bulbs only use 20% of the power that they used to have. In other words, to get 100 watts of light, I only need to spend 20 watts now to get 100 watts worth of light. So that's a tremendous savings. And those power plants were built back in the days when to get 100 watts of light, I needed 100 watts of energy. So I want, between that and the new flat screen TVs using less power and other ways of saving energy, we can save enough power that we don't need all these nuclear power plants. I mean, they're just far too dangerous. And I also think that we should consider even getting rid of automobiles. There's no reason all automobiles shouldn't be electric, and that our liquid fuel, like the fossil fuel, gasoline and diesel fuel, should be used for airplanes, because you obviously can't plug an airplane in, and you need such density and power that you have to have. There's no other way of fueling an airplane. You can't fuel an airplane with a battery. It just doesn't release enough power. So to fly around halfway around the Earth in a Boeing 777, you need to have aircraft fuel. So that would be a petroleum distillate product. So those products should be saved for aircraft, and anything that is land-based, fixed base of operation, should be based solely, run solely on solar, wind, or hydroelectric power, or tidal power, or geothermal, or any other kind of power that doesn't have to be mobile. So there should be a distinction in science and in law and in public policy between items that use power that are mobile and need mobile power, which would then force you to use diesel or gas, versus the consumption of fuel for a fixed base of operation, namely a school or a home or a building where that building sits there, and we can feed it with electricity lines, and those electricity lines can derive power from whatever source we can dream up, which doesn't have to be mobile. So it could be solar, it could be wind, or combination thereof, or whatever thing we want to do, and then as a complete and total backup, we could have nuclear. But the nuclear power plants have got to be hardened in some way, so that if there's a loss of electricity, we don't have a Fukushima-style disaster. Because if there were, for example, an EMP or a solar event that causes a collapse or a burnout of our transformers, which, by the way, is expected to happen, and it's overdue for it to happen, if we should lose power, we don't want these domestic electric power plants to overheat, and it would be like getting hit by an atomic bomb, without the explosion. What at 3 Mile Island? I mean, I lived just as the crow flies. I only lived about 50 miles from 3 Mile Island, and at that time I was flying my airplane every day, and I was flying my airplane downwind from 3 Mile Island. But never in the news was there any mention that there was a danger. But I can remember flying my airplane for hours and hours, and every time I landed I would feel so tired for a couple of days. It would be like, I just don't feel right. And you know what that probably was? Because radioactivity was being released into the air, and I was breathing it in, and it probably harmed my immune system. And but I clearly remember feeling tired every time I flew my airplane. Really, really, really tired. And I always would say to myself, this flying an airplane is not fun. I need to do it for work because I have to see clients, and it's the only way of getting from here to there without the traffic. And it would be a 3 or 4 hour drive versus a 30-minute airplane ride in my own airplane. So on the one hand, I had great freedom, and I really thank God that I had the ability to pay for the training, which I worked hard to make the money to pay for the training. I had the best training, I had the best flight instructors, I went to the best school, and thankfully I'm going to tell you some stories about flying where I came within inches of dying, and if I wasn't so well trained I easily would have been involved in an accident and been killed. But flying in a small plane is dangerous. Flying in a big plane is nowhere near as dangerous as flying in a small plane. But in any case, we have to look into some of the strange things that are happening on the Earth today, like the chemtrails. What are they? Have we inspected our airplanes to see what they have? What capability do they have to spray chemicals on the people? How do we know a madman isn't going to spray something bad out the same nozzles that maybe are supposed to be there for a noble reason but could be used for a nefarious reason? Is there a tsunami weapon, and was a tsunami weapon used to create the tsunami that damaged and crippled the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear reactor, TEPCO reactor? And what about the Bali? Remember in the island paradise of Bali there was that big tsunami. I mean, maybe that was a test. Maybe that was a test of the tsunami weapon that later damaged the Fukushima reactor. Just seems awful curious to me that this earthquake and gigantic tsunami came right off the coast of Fukushima, right at a time when they were refueling it, when it was the most vulnerable. But folks, look please, I ask you once again, give me a call if you want to talk about anything. There's my number, 407-463-2700. My email is just my name, benjamincola@aol.com. Shoot me an email and use PayPal to donate. Please, anything that you can donate to us right now is very important. We're at a critical phase right now, and I would like to run for office, and I am going to run for office, win, fail, lose, or whatever, but I'm going full blast for this thing, and we need the money so that we can open up the website and we can get our foot in the door. And I believe that with the training I have and the Evergreen Awards that I have, that backing me would be a good thing to do. I firmly believe in the Constitution, and we're going to look into these problems with the earth overheating, and we're just not going to listen to Al Gore telling us that it's us breathing and it's our automobiles and stuff. Believe me, it's not the people of the earth doing this. It's these great big giant events like Fukushima melting down and nuclear. It's funny how nuclear is not ever mentioned when it comes to the earth getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And it's only nuclear that has the power to melt the ice caps, and also the sun going up and down in its power output. We need to investigate all this stuff, and with the EPA simply turning off the machines that measure radionuclides in the air, I mean, I'm starting to wonder, if you add this up, it just starts to look to me like they're avoiding telling us the truth about what our background radiation levels are. And I also have some other interesting experiments that I conducted, and based on some of my own research, I'm going to show you some things that are going to be really surprising. And but look, folks, we're going to have another part today. I'm going to tell you another funny story. Remember, like the air hockey thing that I told you about the other day? It was sort of funny. We're going to have another one of those, and then we'll talk some more about the environmental issues. But please donate. I appreciate each and every one of you. I love you all, folks. Have a great day. Thanks.